Good afternoon. This is Andy Williams with M33 Integrated. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of our partners who are joining us, as well as any prospects and any other business associates who have been open to and signed up to attend the webinar today. If you're not currently viewing the webinar, but you see this after the fact in a recording, thank you again, and we look forward to hopefully following up with you to tell you a little bit more about M33. Just to get started, I'll introduce M33, and I'm joined today by Fritz Mays, who is a fellow business associate and a key customer dedicated account manager. He works directly on site with one of our customers and spends a lot of time working with business intelligence and KPIs for this particular customer. So hopefully to bring some insight to some of the charts and graphs and other things that we talk about today. We will be presenting or being able to answer questions at the end of the session today. This session is to last approximately 30 minutes. Hopefully we won't go over, but we definitely want to get to your questions. If you have a question, there should be a box in the GoToWebinar feature box field, or whatever you want to call it, that you should be able to type a question in, and we will do our best to get to that question and answer it as timely as possible. Just to get started, I want to introduce who M33 is again. We are, or should I say, we provide technology tools and intelligence to reduce costs and automate logistics. Companies that we work with predominantly are in manufacturing or distribution of a consumable product and both manage freight in an international and a national setting. What's interesting about our role is that a lot of times our initial interaction with companies is that we help them reduce cost and streamline operations. But typically, anywhere from the 3-month-on point, we spend so much time and effort focusing on business intelligence, consultative approaches to both historical data and strategic values that we put together, and really focus on working with companies to help drive out areas of opportunity. So today I hope that I can bring to you a level of, I guess, some best practices when it comes to business intelligence and key performance indicators. We'll get started. You know, it's interesting. I was actually brainstorming with a couple of some fellow employees and also some customers, and I asked the question because I think we all often get into a reporting nightmare at least one point in our life. The larger a company gets, it seems, the more reporting that they get involved in. So one of the greatest challenges that every company faces is what's the right reports for us. So we kind of put together a list of things we've seen in the past. One of the challenges I think we often see is that companies sometimes recognize the difference in a data dump versus a measurable value. Fritz, chime in if you have any suggestions or ideas here to any of this information. But oftentimes we see that some of the greatest ERP systems that companies are using will give you a lot of information. They will dump a lot of data into a spreadsheet format. However, taking that to a place where you can actually make decisions off of it is a chore in itself.
Yeah, it's something that we really try to focus on what's important to the customer that we're working for and showing the measurements and what's important to them. If it's a cost per mile, cost per pound, you know, the importance is not just to inundate you with a ton of numbers and data, but to put something in front of you that you're going to be able to, you know, to Andy's point, make an action item off of it. And that's something that we pride ourselves in M33 and try to overcome that hurdle of just throwing a bunch of data at you versus giving you actionable data.
Good deal. That makes sense. You know, another thing that we often find as a challenge is data integrity. It's funny because we face these challenges sometimes from a ERP integration perspective, also from a user level data entry perspective. But is the information that you're trying to capture and represent a report off of, not only is it accurate, but has it been, you know, we use this funny phrase called scrubbed, but has it been scrubbed to a level that really tells you what you want to see? An example would be how many times or how many different versions of one of your major customers is spelled differently? And are you capturing all of that information at the right level, or are you seeing multiple versions when you're trying to make decisions off of that? Also, another question is, does it tell the complete story? Which brings up another I guess another key point is, how do you know how to compare your information or should I say, to what time frame should you compare your information to? It's not very fair from a seasonality perspective for a company who recognizes ups and downs in certain times of the year to compare maybe a fourth quarter to a third quarter. because even though costs may change to the better or to the worse, it's not a true average of what the trend was, maybe more of a year-over-year comparison. Another challenge that we often see is the information that is being shared, are the reports that are being presented that's telling the same story to all users or to all readers. One person may look at it and say, this looks like we need to go one direction, and another person may look at it and say, you know what, I've seen these trends in the past, I think we need to stay the course. So the question is, how does the company in general and all the users responsible for reading these reports get on the same page as to what they're looking for and how to read those reports? Another big report nightmare often comes into what I call monitoring complacency. And that is, over time, it seems like reports that are really important on the onset of a relationship or the onset of an initiative, I should say, oftentimes fall by the wayside. And before long, the emails aren't being opened, the reports aren't being looked at, and what would normally have been recognized as a great tool to understand when things change are no longer able to do that because they're not actually being viewed each time that these reports are generated. And then lastly, I apologize for the I guess a little bit extreme phrases here, but are the reports a hemorrhaging report or a scouting report? In other words, do they show only where you are really bleeding, where you're having a lot of pain in your company, or are they providing an opportunity to say, hey, what are we going to be up against in the near future? And obviously a scouting report is going to be reflective of history. That's the only thing you really have to report. But hopefully the scouting report will identify trends that say, if all stays the same and no outside circumstances occur, we should expect this to continue in this direction. And the scouting reports are of value because, unlike a hemorrhaging report, it's not all everything is bad, but it's here are some of the actionable items, like Fritz mentioned earlier, that we can take in order to accomplish a change in this direction. I want to take a minute and just talk a little bit about why it is that a company like ours would spend so much time focusing and helping our partners really get into the life cycle of reporting and understand why certain reports may tell stories. We often get identified or categorized in a bucket that reflects transportation or logistics or freight companies. And it is true that we are a co-managed provider of logistics services for our customers. But the crazy thing about logistics and freight is it tells a lot of stories upstream of what occurred upstream in the life cycle of an order. And you can see from this slide, logistics really gets into the meat of a lot of different departments throughout the life cycle of an order. From the time that an order is placed, and customer service is initially attending to get accurate rates to make sure that they cover the cost and the profitability of the actual product, through to the shipping process, obviously critically important to make sure that right decisions are made there, all the way through to customer service being responsible for maintaining and understanding where that shipment is in transit. And then at the very end, at the executive boardroom level, you can see that, post-audit, post-shipment paid, beginning to understand why costs may be up or down. The other thing that's interesting, too, is if you take the freight costs out of the reports, they often still tell a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, it's something that rates are only one piece of the puzzle, and if that's all you're looking at, you're missing the opportunities and where you actually can control or change the negative or positive impact to rates. Absolutely, and one thing I hope we're going to find out a little bit today is that Fritz spends a lot of time with a key customer on a pretty robust report that tells a lot of information, despite the fact that rates are important, but at the same time it helps us understand where we're missing targets in some cases. So the question, back to the original question, why do we want to identify these key performance indicators? I'm just going to flip through these real quick in the interest of time. Three major things we're trying to accomplish. One is clarity. Where are we today? Whatever it is we're trying to measure, where are we today? It could be supply chain costs. It could be performance variables. It could be some metric associated with a key request by a big customer. But how do we benchmark ourselves to where we were, and then how do we shore up where we want to be versus where we actually end up today? Another key reason is vision or direction. Help me identify where I want to go. A lot of people don't see this, but reports can ultimately show you a map to the future. Not only a map of what direction you're going, but what you could do to change that direction. And then lastly, to be able to take control.
to be able to say, I understand what things have to be done in order to adjust the patterns that I'm seeing in some of these reports. Another key question is what should be measured. When we're looking at reports from a supply chain perspective, we want to understand the categories that are important to you, and we want to recognize what you're ultimately trying to accomplish. Everyone starts off by saying we want to cut cost. The reality is cutting cost is not always a financially driven decision. Sometimes it's more of an efficiency situation, and sometimes it has to do with some type of energy efficiency or possibly in some case market condition impact. It could mean that in some cases increasing your cost today based on reporting could drive your costs down in the near future. And you can see I put some of these things here. A lot of our customers come to us and say, I want to know when costly vendor selection has occurred, when decisions have been made to choose a higher cost provider and what the reason was behind that. Others may say, I want to see how our energy costs have changed from one month to the next. We can't control the Department of Energy's average fuel price per gallon nationally, but we want to know what it's done to us year over year. Another question that we often get is, what would happen if we changed behavior? And we often recognize that as process improvement. What would it take to identify what the impact is associated with something as simple as a quality challenge? Maybe another thing is origination studies. A lot of our customers say, hey, we want to understand what would happen if we shifted our distribution patterns from one location to the next. And then lastly, we kind of categorize, and this is the hardest category, and we understand that, and that's called customer and vendor management. Customer and vendor management entails, from our perspective, working with our customers to help generate information, maps, direction that defines what helps them make their customers and their vendors better partners. Examples of that would be exception costs. How often have you gone above and beyond the call of duty for one of your customers only to recognize that it's considered the norm in the future? Another question would be from a customer shipping patterns. When you sign that customer up for the first time and they established maybe a reputation for a certain means of ordering patterns, is that reputation still the same today? Because oftentimes that initial perspective was what you costed the product out to be. And then 6 months from now, if it changes, is it still going to be the same cost model, or is it a new cost model?
Yeah, another example of something that comes up frequently are lumper fees, or where you have to pay for your goods to be offloaded at your customer. And a lot of folks, including sales, where it would be important, are either not aware or don't pay much attention, but they can add up, to thousands of dollars in a month, depending on the customer. And that's just one example of something that, as you're taking on customers, I think you want to make sure you don't miss, and when you're negotiating and looking at your price with them.
Makes sense. And now that we've kind of gone through some of these bullet points, and Fritz is going to speak a little bit on this, but in order to keep from a slow death by reporting, I should say, how do we go about identifying if someone on this call today maybe has never really spent a lot of time on reporting, or the reports they have recognized in the past have been just maybe a data dump, really didn't tell them a story? How do we go about identifying where to start, where to begin? One such report that we spend a lot of time on with one of our actually a couple of our key customers, and Fritz seems to be heavily involved in this with the customer that he works with, is called a waterfall report. What this does is it helps us identify what the freight cost expectation was. In other words, what did we budget for? And when I say we, I mean on behalf of our partner, helping them budget for a certain dollar figure, maybe for a year, for 6 months, or every month, month over month, associated with freight cost. And so what you see on this report is on the left side, you would typically identify a budgeted cost over here, and then from that budgeted cost, which starts at a little over $12 million, and I apologize that the bar has disappeared on me for some reason, but compared to the budgeted cost, how do we compare to what actually was the case? And the actual cost over here at $14.6 million versus maybe a budgeted cost closer to $13 million. And then you can see in each of the columns here, it represents an impact number, and an impact number recognizing are we above or below the budgeted cost expected, and if we're below the budgeted cost, it shows up in green, which means it's a beneficial number for that particular category. If it's in red, that means we have spent more than was expected from the budget, but it's identified in that particular category for a reason.
Yeah, and the purpose of the buckets is really to generate discussion, not so much, say, between someone like M33, the provider with our client, but within the client's organization, because there's a lot of things as a third-party logistics company that we can't control or dictate, and that's the length of haul of shipments, how much weight is going on the shipment, how much expedited is needed, what's driving that. Obviously, we can impact the rates, but again, between where you should have been budgeted for freight and where you actually end up in a month or a year is driven by a lot of factors, and this is a great way to graph it all in a single snapshot of what things are driving your freight cost either up or down.
Yeah, so here's an example in looking at this particular report. If you recognize that the actual cost is $14.6 million and the budgeted cost was closer to $13 million, that means that totally today, this example, the customer would have spent $1,006,000 more than what was expected. That sounds like a terrible result or a terrible outcome. However, if you look at rates impact and fuel impact, those have been positive. So if you simply took those alone and said, how are we comparing to what we expected, it's a $600 and something thousand improvement. So where has our loss come, or where has our over budget expense been? And you can see miles impact, mode selection impact, weight impact, and expedited impact all have a key factor associated with, like what Fritz said, nothing to do with did you negotiate competitive rates with the carrier. Regardless of how competitive your rates have been negotiated, those all played a negative role in driving your overall cost up. Another really important report, and I just want to throw out some of my favorites here to begin with, but another really important report that several of our customers work in is they want to understand the freight cost associated with specific products in their mix. And it's very challenging for a lot of companies to get a freight cost down to the product level, because in a lot of cases we have customers who happen to ship multiple products to their customers on the same shipment. So how do you break those things out? And each company seems to have a different way of wanting to do this. For the particular sample I'm showing you here, this particular customer likes to break their cost out by a amount of the total space taken up on that particular shipment. So as you can see, as an example, red ribbons, which happens, we use these as kind of just bogus names, but red ribbons is the name of a particular product. And you can see in the month of August, they spent $1,700 particularly shipping red ribbons. That number went down to $1,500 in September and $1,390 in October. Now you can take that information, you can break it down to the per unit level. Now some companies on this call I know I'm familiar with who would actually say our interest is to identify freight cost on a per pound basis. And it's very helpful when we're costing out the product. So as an example, if we're trying to figure out what we should sell our big boulders for here, how much do we need to associate with freight? Well, for a weight perspective, you can divide the overall cost for that particular product on freight by the weight. But if you actually have the units, in some cases you can see some of these products we have the units, you can actually divide it by the number of units. And so as you can tell, it's very important to recognize if you were shipping small bags in August, if you did not cover $2.03 of the product cost in pure freight expense, then that caused a profitability issue. And then finally, I guess if I were to give you three reports that are really seem to be quite important to a lot of our customers, this one is called a red light customer stack report. It's a very simple report. What it does is it identifies a key customer name, and it compares a current month's average cost against the average of the previous 3 months. And we call this a red light because it automatically pops up. It's not something that you monitor each month. It just shows you when there are certain customers in the red light category. So as an example, for this customer, they've told us anything where the impact caused a negative $2,000+ change from what we expected, which again goes back to budgeted versus actual, then we want to see that, and we want to identify that as a red light or red flag or whatever you want to call it. So you can see on this particular example, the top 5 customers, overall supply chain spend to those customers have gone over what was budgeted, on average from $2,000 to $4,000. Now, this doesn't tell you why, but it just helps identify these are customers you need to dive into further. So if you're sitting at the end of a month and you say, gosh, our overall supply chain cost is up $50,000, then you may be able to look at this briefly and say, okay, here's 40 of the $50,000. I know exactly where to start looking. We talked about the three key components of what we want reports to do. One is to drive out waste, the second is to improve processes, and the third is to improve customer and vendor relationships. So if we talk about the first, a lot of companies will work with basic metric studies just to highlight or an overall view. This one particular one is broken down by quarter. And what's important about this particular report or KPI is that it identifies a historical cost. So what we've done is we've specified what we estimated as the benchmark, or we identified a value that should have traditionally been the case had we not taken on a certain initiative. Then what we've done is we've identified what the actual cost is and seen what that reduction is. And then we can break it down a step further and talk about how was that reduction separated out. Was it more of an energy cost reduction? Was it other components that were involved in the initiative that helped drive that cost down? From there, you would want to ultimately keep some kind of scorecard if you've got an initiative that you're driving to make change with. And you want to be able to recognize what the savings looks like from month to month. You know, all it takes is 1 month, one challenging month for a customer to have that could wipe out all the savings on a given initiative. And it's important to recognize what the impact is on some of those challenges that occur, because we know that those are sometimes unavoidable. It's also healthy to recognize how you're comparing to the market. And if you have a means or a tool to be able to shore up or see what the market is doing each month and then see how you reflect against the market, it doesn't mean that you should be concerned when you are getting or seem to be trending worse than the market or trending better than the market. It's just important to recognize what the market impact is, or else you may make decisions without knowing what the market is ultimately bearing. A little bit more around the drive out waste. One of the things that's important for a lot of our customers is to recognize on-time performance. This one particularly defines on-time performance by some of the vendors that they use, which is the trucking companies. In other cases, companies want to recognize on-time performance by major customers so that they make sure that their customers are being maintained. You know, it's one of the challenges that we've seen happen in the past is you could have a carrier who is, or a particular company who is trending at 99% on-time performance, yet one customer is consistently delivered late to. And unless you're looking at reporting or metrics to identify that customer, it could be that that customer goes away and doesn't tell you why. Another report that is a critical report with a lot of our customers is they want to do distribution studies. They want to understand what would happen if they moved certain distribution points from being manufactured at one plant to being manufactured at some other plant. And so they say, help me understand from an overall cost perspective, what would the new freight cost be if we shipped this particular customer or maybe this particular area of the country out of a new location. This sample here shows you the difference in shipping freight out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania versus Boston, Massachusetts. And you can see for this particular set of data, the impact reflected a very similar study with the most significant changes being in Pennsylvania, and as a result, Pennsylvania would be a good bit cheaper coming out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania versus coming out of Boston, Massachusetts. But what's interesting is if you look at the Massachusetts difference, there's not much at all. Helps make a decision as to where the ultimate change needs to be on where this freight is distributed out of. Another really important metric that we often see customers asking for is trending studies. They want to understand what the trends of some of their major customers' ordering patterns are. This one's a simple one. It just identifies the overall volume from month to month. In a few minutes, I'll show you another one where we actually have more detailed trending specific to average weight per shipment. For some of you, this is not an important request. For others, maintaining an understanding of how you're impacting the carbon footprint in the environment is critical. And one of the challenging things about transportation is it often encompasses 45 to 50% of a total manufacturing facility's carbon footprint. And oftentimes companies look at it and say we have very little control over that. But the federal government has recently put into place a Smart Way Transportation program. It's been in place actually for about 3 or 4 years. And it is one of several tools that are available to really help identify what your carbon footprint is and how you can improve on some of that. Process improvement, another critical component of reporting. A key example of that would be how much does freight cost change when you change your means of seeking carriers at certain times of the day. An example would be, is your average order being requested at a certain time of the day, and is an urgency changing the cost associated, or maybe from a profitability perspective, the impact of that transportation spend? You can see an example we have here where we did for one customer that reflected when when shipments are requested for pickup the day before they need to move, you can see there's an opportunity to save money. But when they are requested, particularly on the same afternoon of pickup, then you see, compared to the benchmark we established, a $43 loss versus the average. That's a process improvement, and a lot of times it's a workflow challenge. And just looking at where the workflow and the communication is coming in internally, we can often alleviate the cost associated with afternoon requests.
Yeah, another important aspect of the KPIs is education, and people just don't realize the impact and in this example, the importance of lead time in obtaining more capacity, cheaper rates versus giving you more of a crunch time scenario where you don't have that flexibility. Another report that we do is a missed opportunity report, which is more to the carrier side and really looks at when the lowest cost carrier didn't accept a load. It can give you a good idea real quickly of how to manage your carrier base. Are there certain lanes that a carrier all of a sudden is not taking, et cetera, that can help you improve the process from the carrier side, where this is more of an internal lead time type scenario that we have up here.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you talk about the missed opportunities report, Fritz. One thing we see with some customers on the missed opportunities report is it really has very little to do with the carrier not being able to meet the expectation so much as did the expectation change?
Yes.
And when the expectation did change, what was the impact? Oftentimes we'll find on a missed opportunities report an expedited carrier was used, and then we have reason codes that help identify why was that particular expedited carrier being used. And it could simply be a quality issue. It could be a sense of urgency where the customer's paying for it, or it might have just been because it felt like they needed it there faster. Another example of a report in which we identify opportunities to optimize shipments, meaning key lanes where there's a chance that some shipments are going so often to certain destinations that we have to ask the question, hey, is this customer's ordering pattern does it really need to be every day? Are they actually using the product that they're shipping every single day? Or could we reduce the number of shipments to that customer to maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week? Maybe the answer is no, it has to be every day, and that's okay. But what would be the cost savings had you have the opportunity to reduce the number of shipments with the same volume to that customer? And then finally, kind of getting to some of that customer and vendor management we've been talking about. Understanding from month to month and maybe from quarter to quarter like this one reflects, and it's an older report, you can see 2010 and 2011, but understanding how their cost per pound has changed from month to month, or excuse me, quarter to quarter. So you can see on here it'd be very healthy to know that your shipments to Grand Canyon customer have gone down significantly from the fourth quarter of 2010 to the first quarter of 2011. Unfortunately, they trended back up in the third quarter of 2011, and we want to know why that happened. So we would take it a step further, and then we would then identify, let's see some of these customers, and from a month-to-month perspective, is it positive? Is it an improvement? Is it a sustainment of what it is has always been, or has it increased? You can see that one of these particular ones, Scott's, has gone up from month to month. It started off at 6.9 cents a pound, and that's the particular unit of measure that they wanted to utilize for this customer. And then in June and July, it's gone up 8.9 cents and 9.3 cents. What's interesting about this one is we added in here an average weight per shipment, which is reflected in probably one of the main reasons why the cost per pound has gone up here. And lastly, one of the key elements that companies want to understand is what would happen if I could get a lot of my shipment sizes to a different weight category. It's an interesting study to look at. If you'll see at the bottom here, statistically, whenever you're able to move a shipment from the what we call the minimum charge range, for this particular example, to a 500 to 1,000 pound shipment, maybe just giving a customer an incentive to order a little bit more each time, you could go as far as to cutting your average cost per pound, or cost per unit in this case, by a third. And then you can see how those same trends occur from one particular category to the next as you grow the size, the average size of that shipment. As I'm getting close on time here, I'll just kind of flip through these really quick. Very important when we're developing key performance indicators for companies, and I'm sure you're the same, that first of all, we speak the language of the company. It's not fair for us to come in and start talking about cost per pound when they have no interest in cost per pound. Maybe they recognize costs, or they identify profitability by number of impressions, or number of widgets, or number of boxes or cartons. So as long as we can capture that data, as long as you can capture that data, you can report on it. Another one, trending to accommodate acceptable variances. Again, this goes back to, are we comparing ourselves to a data study in a previous time frame that is not a really comparable value? Maybe it needs to be a 13-month or a year-over-year or a month-over-month comparison. Another thing that's important to recognize is there are going to be some reports that reflect a negative or a positive trend based on a variable or a fixed cost. And then unfortunately, in some cases, that variable cost may be out of our control. And if it's out of our control, or out of your control, then we need to recognize it and understand that we need to find how quickly we can identify a pattern that helps us go back to profitability. Another one, managing across leaders of all affected departments. You know, how many different departments need to see these reports? And also the other question is, does it a one-size-fit-all? Does one report work for all departments? Or are there things that the procurement department really would like to see that are different than what maybe customer service isn't interested in?
Yeah, it's important, again, that looking at a slide deck of metrics and KPIs, it's not a one-way conversation between the provider, the 3PL, and the client. It's really to drive conversation within the companies we work with, across departments, across even locations, et cetera, because that's the purpose of it. That's where the actionable items come into play, and that's where we can help a company improve their efficiencies and make some process changes and really use the KPIs to drive their internal conversations, and it's not just us and a transportation manager, for example.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Clearly identify gaps and opportunities. Where are some of the areas, and I would highly recommend that you prioritize these. If you're getting the right report, then again it's a combination of a scouting report and an impact study. What I mean by that is it tells you how much it's costing you based on what you've seen that you want to change, and then it also helps you identify what to do to make that change. And then lastly, I would just suggest that positive change must be tied to some sustainable form of key performance indication management. It's not as simple as to say, hey, we've got to start seeing this every month. Please send us this report. What it needs to be is we're going to do this as a result of the information that's shared in this report every single month. And when it gets old, everyone, including us, needs to be willing to admit this report is no longer valid. Let's stop it because it's complacency by consistent reporting.
Yeah, the slide deck should be considered a work in progress, and things come and things go as situation drives. Things maybe you hadn't looked at before, and then all of a sudden it's not an issue anymore. It's got to be flexible and move with what's going on in the business.
This brings us to the end of our presentation. We really appreciate you joining us. I know that talking about reporting, much less having to view reports, can be a very boring topic, but it's something that we really get into and we enjoy doing. And again, if we're sitting in a meeting with a company and we're presenting reports and no one seems engaged, we'll be the first to admit, let's trash this report and let's talk about what's important to you. Reports must be tied to goals. They must be actionable. And they must be able to identify the impacts associated with them. You know, if you have 3 opportunities to do something different, you need to choose the one first that shows you the greatest amount of savings, or the greatest amount of growth. We don't have any questions typed in so far. I've left this last slide represents an email address for both Fritz and myself. I really welcome anybody who has any questions, whether you're a partner or just someone who has more interest or has an interest in learning more about key performance metrics. Please reach out to us. We don't have all the answers, but we would love to talk to you a little bit about them. And maybe if you've got some ideas or suggestions on those that we didn't show today, we'd love to talk to you about those too. Again, our information's on here. Thank you for your time. And this presentation will be available If anyone would like a copy of it later, please just reach out to me and ask for a copy. Once again, thank you for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.